Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and boy, we got some great guests today. And first of which is I'm so delighted and honored to have back with us today Dr. Jack Cashill. He's a regular contributor to WorldNet Daily. You probably have read some of his articles. Emmy Award-winning independent writer. And I'm delighted to talk to him about all the things going on concerning gun control. By the way, you may want to get a copy of his book, If I Had a Son, Race, Guns, and Railroading of George Zimmerman. There's a picture of that. Those watching on theDove TV can see that. You may want to get a copy of that book, and we'll talk to him about that a little bit later on. So, Jack, nice to see you. Merry Christmas, my friend.
Oh. By the way, I will be premiering my book TV event on Saturday, 1 p.m. your time.
When's that again? I'm sorry.
It's 1 p.m. West Coast time, Pacific time. The book TV premiere of If I Had a Son. Okay,
great. Well, congratulations. That's wonderful. Well, listen, we're watching the continuation of more gun control, and Schumer's now pushing for it. What's your take on this?
Well, you know, there's an element of opportunism, especially among like New York State senators who don't understand the way the rest of America thinks. You know, I grew up in New Jersey, and I just spent Thanksgiving with my family. And even though a lot of them vote Republican, they almost to a person don't own guns. And when you bring up when guns are talked about, they're apprehensive and scared. Like, this is terrible. You know, it's a bad thing. That's the way they think back there. And it's the irony is that they're much more vulnerable to say home invasions and other kinds of street crime than we are than most conservatives are, who live in the suburbs and rural parts of America. And yet, you know, so they're an easy audience for people like Chuck Schumer, in other words.
Well, this push for gun control is mounting pretty fast. Now, what's happening? Is it in the House right now that they got the bill going through on these so-called plastic guns, or coming out of these 3D printers?
Well, you know, it's well, I just saw a headline today. I know that the House approved the bill that even the NRA approved, and I couldn't tell you what that bill was. I didn't get a chance to read beyond the headline. That was just yesterday. I don't think that's the Schumer bill.
Yeah.
Schumer's looking for something more comprehensive. The Democrats always are. And you'd think they would have been sobered up by the results of the 2000 election, when Al Gore's having championed gun control, cost him his own state, Tennessee. It cost him Arkansas, Bill Clinton's state, and those two states alone could have won him the election.
Wow.
But they did not. And so for a while, the Democrats were mum on the issue. They're much more cagey about it now. But you see how they exploit, like, a Sandy Hook.
Right.
Shamelessly. Mm-hmm. And like now Obama's encouraging like Sandy Hook anniversary kind of commemorations as a way of promoting gun control as an issue.
Well, Jack, what is the ideological bent behind gun control? Because, hey, I'm in the West. I was born almost with a shotgun in my hand. My dad had me carry a shotgun, empty, by the way, at a young age, as he taught me hunting. I've always been around guns, and I get it. I'm pro-Second Amendment. But there seems to be something else behind this push for gun control. There's an ideological thing or a psychological thing. What is it?
You know, there's many motives. For most Democrats don't think any further than their next election, and if they think it's a winning issue, they'll advance it. I think, though, for the hardcore leftists in our midst, many of whom are pulling strings in the Democratic Party, it's an issue of control. If you take guns away from individuals, we go right back to here are the roots of the Second Amendment. That is, as a way of preventing governmental tyranny. If you're inclined towards tyranny, you know that an armed citizenry is the last thing you want to face. I live in the Midwest, and you know, where most of my friends own guns. When we talk about guns, talk about what kind of guns we have, not whether we have guns. And it would be very difficult in places like where I live or where you live for an ambitious, tyrannical government to have its way. But you take our guns away, and we are much more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. That's at the highest and deepest level of the American left. That's the way they think. For the other 90%, it's just like, can I win with this issue or can I lose with this issue? They have armed guards themselves. A lot of them have guns themselves. You know, they're hypocrites on this issue. But if they think it'll win for them, they'll push it.
All right. Personally, I don't trust Schumer or Harry Reid. So could this get attached to another bill and get snuck through?
I don't think so. Not through Congress. Congress knows that the Republicans in Congress know they start voting for gun control, they're voting themselves out of office.
You think the average Democrat actually understands that?
I don't know. Democrats, if they're in safe districts, they don't care. But if they're in marginal districts, if they're in districts that are, 50-50 kind of districts where they can swing one way or another, they will not vote for gun control.
That has to say a lot about the NRA and its power.
Yeah, the NRA is, I think the left mistakes the NRA, mistakes its power. The power in the NRA comes from its base. That is the people who belong to the NRA, the people who own guns, the people who take guns seriously, even the people who own guns who don't belong to the NRA. Instead, the left thinks of the NRA as some sort of monolithic organization that determines how these people are going to think and acts accordingly. No, I mean, even if the NRA went away tomorrow, the issue wouldn't change much and the voting patterns wouldn't change much.
Well, I often thought of all the issues that this administration has gone after, if they had kept pushing the Second Amendment issue, that would have been the one that could possibly create some kind of an insurrection in our society. But now it might be Obamacare, but but the Second Amendment issue carries with it a lot of volatility. You're
absolutely right, because the people who support the Second Amendment are the people the government fears most, and rightfully.
Yeah.
In Florida, for instance, and I studied this at some depth in writing my book on the George Zimmerman case. There are 1.1 million concealed carry holders. Those are 1.1 million votes against gun control.
There you go.
Sure votes. And they'll vote. And not only will they vote, if you come to take their guns away, many of them, most of them perhaps, will resist, especially if it's seen as an illegal gun grab.
On a sidebar issue, Jack, just for a moment, you probably saw the testimony of the gentleman from the Cato Institute, who basically is saying, since the president is writing law or adding to law that's already been passed, it creates a potential environment that if he's going to disobey the Constitution and the order of law, what's stopping the American people from obeying the law, and therefore whether or not we would register guns at all.
No, that's an excellent point, and I think Charles Krauthammer picked that up as well. We've entered an era of unprecedented presidential lawlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Where the not just the Constitution, which they've always taken, frivolously, but the laws they write themselves, like Obamacare.
Right.
Oh, okay, I think I'll change this. No, you don't get to change that.
Yeah.
Congress is supposed to do that. And even in the House shutdown, Congress was exercising a very lawful prerogative, and that is paying for this fiasco. Democrats should have had a good deal there. They should have taken it. They would have saved themselves a lot of heat. Then they could have blamed, they could have kicked the ball down the road and blamed the Republicans.
Well,
we gave them the opportunity. They didn't take it.
In some ways, they're not even doing their duty, because they're supposed to protect and defend the Constitution. And if the president's going to be lawless, why aren't we going after this thing?
Well, it just right now, it's sort of like, when Bill Clinton was president, there were so many scandals, it was hard to know which one to which one to focus on. And now there are so many examples of lawlessness, it's hard to know how to attack it.
Yeah.
For instance, the EPA, I think, is out of control. The disability program is out of control. The Obamacare is clearly out of control. And the Benghazi situation, the IRS, there are so many points of entry that it includes furor. You know what I mean? If it was just one thing we could focus our wrath on, it would be one thing. But there's so many different things. But guns, they know. The smart people in the Democratic Party know is one thing you don't want to mess with.
Before I take a break, I want to head to your book, and we'll cover it in detail on the other side of the break. But before we do, what led you to take on the Zimmerman case? What was it, in essence, that you thought there was something there?
Well, within a month. In fact, I wrote my first article on I believe, on April 5th. That was about a month after the case surfaced. And I mean, about 6 weeks after it took place, but about a month after it hit the national news. And by that time, it had become obvious to me that for the first time in the history of American jurisprudence, a state government, as Florida, the Department of Justice, the White House, the entertainment industry, the news media, and what's left of the civil rights movement was conspiring together to send a perfectly and transparently innocent man to jail for the rest of his life. That's when I realized that this case deserved attention.
All right. Were you surprised by the verdict?
No. In fact, I did a lot of media during the summer. In fact, I visited Oregon for the first time in my life this summer, but it's a great, nice state.
Thank you.
I was, because I was visiting a friend, and the whole time I was there, I was on the phone with various media outlets, and they would inevitably ask, this was during the trial, what was the outcome? What's going to happen? I said, well, he'll be acquitted. And they'll say, why? Because I said he's innocent. And I said, Seminole County, Florida, where the trial was being held, is, votes Republican. It's not downtown Los Angeles, and this is O.J. Simpson. Mm-hmm. At worst case, someone's going to hang this, but he's not going to be convicted. I had just come, in fact, from the trial, and it's curious because I was staying with a black friend of mine who lives in Portland, the Portland area, and I could see even though he's an objective, sort of independent thinker, how the media had gotten to him, and I knew if it had gotten to him, it had gotten to a whole lot of other people.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Jack about his book, and you may want to check it out. If I Had a Son, and then Race, Guns, and the Railroading of George Zimmerman. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and our special guest today is Dr. Jack Cashill. He's a regular contributor to WorldNet Daily. Perhaps you read some of his articles if you go to that website. It's a terrific one, very resourceful. And we're talking to him about now his book entitled If I Had a Son, Race, Guns, and the Railroading of George Zimmerman. And there's a picture of it on the screen. Those watching on the TV can take a look at it. Let me encourage you to get a copy of it because it's got a lot involved here. And Jack was very close to this case and watched it thoroughly all the way through. All right, Jack. First of all, it doesn't appear that Mr. Zimmerman has done himself any favors lately.
No, he hasn't. At least it certainly doesn't appear like he has.
Yeah.
But what's curious about this is that the left, the media and the government, and the government here, both state and federal, tried to railroad. I mean, they tried to convict him of a crime he should never have even been tried for. He never should have been tried for. They did it to appease the mob. And in this case, Al Sharpton was right. He says, if we didn't march, there's no trial. Well, he was right about that. If they didn't march, there would have been no trial because the Sanford police knew from within an hour of the case that he was, it was pure self-defense. Mm-hmm. It wasn't stand your ground. He's getting his head hammered into concrete, and he did the only thing he could do to, preserve his life at that point. Mm-hmm. And so they dragged this guy through 18 months of this horrible ordeal. The new Black Panther Party puts a $10,000 bounty on his head, and the Department of Justice doesn't even blink. They humiliated him. They made him America's #1 enemy. He couldn't go out of his house. The only time he went shopping during that period at the sporting goods store, they followed him, see what he would buy. He bought a bulletproof vest. They destroyed his marriage. They destroyed his peace of mind. And you have to remember that when he started this process, he was a Democrat, an Obama supporter, and a real genuine civil rights activist. These were his people doing this to him. He had worked with the NAACP the year before on a case involving police brutality against a black homeless guy. And Zimmerman took the lead in that case. He was the only white face in the crowd, or white Hispanic face in the crowd, as the New York Times would say. And so at the end of that process, they ruined this guy's life, and now they relish the evidence of that ruination, Mm-hmm. When he misbehaves or when he gets in trouble with his wife or his girlfriend, both of whom, by the way, were trying to sell their stories to the national media even before the stories took place, which was disturbing in itself. But
okay.
Yeah, no, it's bad, but he should be pitied at this stage, not reviled,
So what happened on that fateful night in February 2012? Well,
the police, like I said, they knew immediately. I mean, because as soon as the police arrived, the first thing Zimmerman did is he stood up and he said, he was standing at that point, and he said, I yelled for help and no one would come help. And then they talked to the one neighbor, Jonathan Good, who testified at the trial, very, straightforward engineer kind of guy, 30-ish. He said, listen, I walked out, I saw what was happening. There was a black guy in a dark hoodie on top, pounding away, MMA style, pounding ground. And then and the guy underneath, the white or Hispanic guy in the red jacket was yelling out, help, help me, help me. And I went in and called 911. I told them to stop, and they wouldn't stop. I wouldn't call 911. They knew what had happened. That George Zimmerman, like he told them immediately, he had been bushwhacked, he'd been sucker punched. He was one of the first victims, public victims of the knockout game, which we're hearing more and more about.
Right.
Trayvon Martin circled back. He had 4 minutes to run 100 yards. He didn't. Came back, circled around in the dark, confronted Zimmerman, punched him in the face, knocked him down, and then jumped on top and started wailing away. Zimmerman was doing what he should have been doing. He didn't make any mistakes that night. I mean, he may have been a little imprudent, but he didn't do anything close to illegal or unethical. He was the neighborhood watch coordinator. He sees a guy wandering through the neighborhood in the rain, looking into house windows, not going in any particular direction. He says, he calls the police. He says he looks like he's high or he's up to no good. Well, he was high. We found that out. And he was likely up to no good because he had been busted recently, Trayvon Martin had, for being in possession of stolen female jewelry and burglary tools. This was not the 12-year-old we saw on TV. This was a 6-foot, 160-pound kid who was a self-styled mixed martial art fighter and was looking to take out his own frustrations on this person that he saw, and that was George Zimmerman.
All right, so the other pieces of the case, it certainly ended up being Second Amendment, but also ended up being a race case. And yet, as you said earlier, he was noted to be a white Hispanic. I mean, there's a new distinction, but that's how it was done.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, you know what they went on, Perry, and this was the terrible irony in this case. If his name had been Jorge Zimmerman or George Zapata,
yeah,
we never would have heard about this case. But, you know, for the first week or so, all that the Martin family's attorneys had to go on, and they were the ones who were instigating this, and their public relations guy, was his name, George Zimmerman. And they presumed he was white.
Wow.
They didn't know that his great-grandfather was black. They didn't know that that Spanish was his first language, that his mother had come from Peru. You know, they didn't know any of that. They just thought he was a white guy, and they were going to get him.
Wow.
And the only way they were going to get him was to make a spectacle out of this, make it a political case. Because the Martin family attorneys weren't interested in having him convicted. They were simply interested in getting him to trial. They're civil attorneys. If he gets arrested, he's vulnerable for lawsuits. And that was their strategy. They got $2 million out of the Homeowners Association.
Wow. All right. A couple of weeks ago, Eric Holder, U.S. Attorney, basically saying the investigation's not over. He's still going after Zimmerman. What in the world can he go after him for? You know, they're trying to, you know, right after the trial. I mean, literally the day after the verdict came in, he spoke to the NAACP in Orlando. Which is just 20 miles from Sanford, Florida, and he told them, you know, because they were all upset and angry because they'd been stirred up by the media, which was misreporting, corrupting the case from the beginning. And he said, well, no, this isn't over yet. We still can get him on federal civil rights charges. Yeah, you could, I suppose, but George Zimmerman was may have been the least racist person in the state of Florida. After, when the Justice Department came into the case, you know, a month after the shooting, they sent a whole swarm of FBI agents down to Sanford to interview anyone who was ever anything to do with George Zimmerman, and they couldn't find a single person who'd ever even heard him tell so much as a racial joke. Not only that, at the time of the shooting, he was mentoring 2 black teenagers. He had been, as I mentioned earlier, just a year earlier, had taken the lead in the case to get justice for a black homeless man who had been punched out by the white son of a police lieutenant. You know, it's like going after, Nelson Mandela on civil rights, or Mother Teresa. I mean, this was as vain a case as there could be. And yet they still continue to dangle that over the heads of black American, particularly the base, so that
the Obama administration is seen as tending to the needs of that base.
Yeah, you know, Holder seems to be bent on racial issues. And I think you make a great point here. He can go after Zimmerman. It may be a waste of time and money and effort, but he still seems to be pretty bent on racial agenda. Can you comment on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when they, when he came into office in 2009, there was one case that had already been adjudicated, and that was the case against the New Black Panthers in Philadelphia for voter intimidation. They had, the case been filed, and they were no-show, so they were guilty. I mean, in a sense, it was they were acknowledging their own guilt, and he threw the case out. Whereas in this case, where there should have been no. Let's face it. I mean, it's an unfortunate statistic, but it's true. There's roughly, for every white person who assaults a black person, there's roughly 35 blacks who assault a white person. The numbers are disproportionate, and they're scary, and they're never reported or rarely reported. But if you're going to make a race-based case, you've got to do it across the board. You can't just single out the one time a non-black shoots a black person. But you have to understand, too, Perry, is that this happened in 2012. This is an election year. We're in Florida, which is the ultimate battleground state. We have two issues at play, both race and guns. We can excite the minority base on race. We can cite the liberal base on guns. And we know, at least the Justice Department did, that we can stir this all up in 2012 and not have to worry about the outcome, because we're not going to know that until 2013. It's not unlike Obamacare in that regard. I mean, you make all the promises in 2012. But you can't, once you've uncorked this bottle, you can't cork it. I mean, The rage is out there. And so when the verdict came down, which was a totally just verdict, entirely predictable verdict, then the Justice Department and the media encouraged, the minority base to feel outrage, because this was like Mississippi in 1955. Nothing had changed.
One last
so we have a black president, so we have a black attorney general. Nothing's changed, right?
Yeah.
That's the message. Yeah. One
last quick question, Jack, before we run out of time. What did you think of the handling of the case by the judge?
Bad. I thought the judge was clearly siding with the prosecution. However, she seemed relieved by the verdict. She was smiling when when the verdict came down. But partly it meant that her case wouldn't be reviewed, and she wouldn't have to go through an appeal.
Right.
But she was giving the illusion of being siding with the defense. But I think secretly, maybe she knew that justice was done when the verdict came in.
And why do you think on the conservative side, the media, hasn't been more active on going after Holder and his frivolous racial cases?
Because they're afraid of the race issue. Conservatives are, Republican politicians are. I mean, they don't want to be called racist. They blanch when that happens. There's a few courageous outlets. I mean, WND, World Net Daily, has done a great job reporting on this. And finally, the major media are finally beginning to pick up.
Right.
Because you're going to render yourself vulnerable if you don't know what's happening out there.
Well, for sure. Hey, Jack, you're a delight. Thank you, my friend. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Keep up the good work. We'll have you back soon.
Hey, Perry, thanks a lot, and hello to all of my friends in Oregon.
Okay. God bless. I will be right back.